Hello, and welcome to the Professor Podcast with Ruth and Claire. Each episode, we talk about a particular topic in the life of a professor. Ruth is a visiting professor at a large university in Ireland, and Claire is an associate professor at a primarily undergraduate university in Northern California. The purpose of our podcast is reflection, so we bring something we think is working and something we're working on to discuss.
Welcome to the Professor Podcast with Ruth and Claire. I'm Ruth.
And I'm Claire, and today we're talking about Ruth's new job. But first, Ruth, how was your week?
My week was medium, and I'm going to apologise to everyone for potentially gross sounds because I'm a little bit under the weather because the month of illness is continuing and the kids are sick again. So yeah, it's just like you kind of become like a crazy fart because I'm like, is it the same illness? Is this different stages of the same illness? So anyway, but
are we all giving it to each other in sequence? What's happening?
Know. And I feel like from a like immunology point of view, like that can't happen. Like anyway, who knows? But in other news, I've started to see daffodils around, so that's giving me hope.
Oh, I love seeing daffodils in the spring.
I love it. Nothing makes me happier. It's so cheerful.
Yes.
And yeah. And as I've talked about on here, the days were real short for a while there, so which still blows my mind, but not my kids' mind. But there is something very valiant about the daffodil popping up after that long, dark winter. So
yeah, it must be getting enough sun. Can you really see that the days are way longer now than they were?
It feels like it's starting for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Cool. That's awesome. That's really cool.
And the girls do not appreciate yesterday it was pitch dark at this time when we got the car, but today it's like they're like, we just don't care. So yeah.
Mom, you've said that a million
I
times.
know. Yeah. I'm sure the podcast listeners are like, Ruth, you said this a million times. But anyway, yeah. So yes, good news, bad news, illness, but hope. So yeah. So how about you? How was your week?
My week was great. Ralph and I are back in Arcata, which is the hometown with our home university. And so we've been out and about different places, mostly in LA for sabbatical. And we came back to Arcata and we had this we were like, oh, well, now we're back in Arcata. We really need to find our new permanent house and we need to work hard on that. And then we were like, oh, we can't work on our sabbatical projects until we find this new place. And then we were like, hold on, we're still on sabbatical. So we just got an Airbnb and we're looking for a place, but we're not like panic mode, must be done yesterday. We're like, oh, we're doing our sabbatical projects in Arcata in this cool Airbnb and we'll go see some places periodically. So it's much more calm. And anyway, so we're enjoying walking around the normal streets again, and that's been really fun. Yeah. Yeah,
and it's like there's only a finite amount of house hunting you can do.
Right.
Like
even
once
if
you
you're
kind of check
going as hard as you can, there's only so many to look at. Yeah.
No, totally. And then that's a nice position to be in where you're not kind of feeling hysterical and you'll take any old...
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, because when it was like, oh, we can't do anything until we find this house, we're like, well, we better just find one, But now it's like, oh, no, we'll find one that we like when we find one. It'll be fine.
Right, and that's the beauty of you're not like, but I have to teach class tomorrow and I need to.
Right. Exactly. So we still are on sabbatical. We're just in this place that we like that happens to be also our hometown.
Yes. Lovely.
So
cool. So do you have a quote for us this week?
I do. I wanted to bring it back to Jen Sincero. I always quote her. She's so great. And it's just a positive thing. You are the only you that will ever be. You are kind of a big deal. I love how she phrases things. It just is so, I don't know. She just always hits the nail on the head with the language, and I really like that.
Well, it's funny because, sometimes you're like that old, like, reality check of, like, you're not the center of the universe. It's like,
right.
But you kind of are really for yourself. Do you know what I mean? Like,
right.
If you're not the center of your universe, then who is really? So, yeah.
I feel like there's times when it's good to remember that the universe is gigantic and that it will keep going despite whatever problems you have. And then there's times to remember that, hey, look at these things I can do. I'm so cool. Yeah, like those are both true. So yes. I like that. Yeah.
100%. Yes. So today, I guess we're talking about my new job.
Yes. So what is your new job, Ruth?
Well, because now that I'm an expert, which is not true.
Yeah. Well, let's start. How long have you been doing this?
It's like 3.5 weeks. And for those 3.5 weeks, my kids have missed like 12 days of school.
Oh, no.
So it's been definitely a mixed bag. And luckily, if I was going to like test my employers about how patient and flexible they would be, this would be the test I would design. It was not on purpose, but everybody's been super nice and super understanding. And so that's been very heartening that no one has been like rolling their eyes and like, again, which is kind of how I feel about it. But yes, they've been super nice about it. So yeah.
That's good. Okay. And now, back to the original. What is your job? Tell us how it goes.
Yes. So in Irish universities, like I'm saying most, but probably all Irish universities have something called an access program, which is a program that kind of is working towards equity of access for people to higher education. Higher education here means like, what do we call it in America?
Higher education in America means like university.
Yes, perfect. Okay. That is what this means.
Okay,
sorry,
perfect.
Claire, you're going to have an uphill struggle today with this cold. What's happening again? But so like kind of promoting equity of access for education. So this program in this university is actually, I think, the longest running, and it's been operating for 30 years. And I am coming in to work on 2 projects predominantly. So one is creating pathways to STEM. So it's working with high school students who are about to finish up and really trying to encourage them to consider STEM programs in courses when they go into university. And then also working on supporting those STEM students as they progress through the degree program. And then the other project that I'm working on, which is probably what I've been engaged with a little bit more so far, is a program called Access Maths. And it's about, the thing I really like about this program and the whole Access program is it's very responsive to data. Do you know what I mean? So they're very like, yeah, maybe we did feel good about this program, but actually it's not working, so we're going to try this other thing. Or
interesting.
Yeah, and it's very like, they really notice. So like, say they noticed that maybe they were getting people into degree programs, but those people were not progressing to work in their field. So then they started to do things like interview preparation and mentorship. Do you know what I mean? So they just feel extremely responsive and very like pragmatic about things and like, okay, this isn't working, so what are we going to change? But so a big thing they're having is they don't have as many people going into STEM programs as they would like. And they recognize that a big part of that is the math preparation in high school, or here really a secondary school. So this is this really interesting program that kind of has 3 legs to it. So one is going out to certain schools and working with the teachers in those schools about how they're engaging with the curriculum. And then the other is to go out and sort of target students in those schools and try and make them not hate math. And then the third one is maybe really engaging with the community and parents in those schools and trying to see, you know, I think a very common experience that teachers have when they talk to parents is parents maybe saying, oh yeah, everyone in our family hates maths. It's, you know, or, oh yeah, nobody like, you know, and that kind of thing. And so trying to maybe shift that a little bit and maybe, yeah. And I think maybe, like something that one of my colleagues has done is maybe going and just chatting with parents about some of the career opportunities that can be further down the line if students do kind of stay engaged with maths. And, you know, so that's kind of, yeah.
That's cool. So Pathways to STEM and Access Maths. And Access Maths, is that also targeting getting more students into higher education in math and STEM?
Yes, yeah. Okay. But it's kind of coming at it from like, I think they kept being like, well, look, here we go. We have all of these programs for you to come and do STEM degrees. But then, so this is a bit in the weeds and maybe a little, but there's kind of 2 math pathways that you can take. And one is like it's called higher level maths, and the other is ordinary level maths. Maybe not great names. But anyway, a lot of people like self-select out of like, oh no, I'm not a maths person, I'm not going to take these higher courses. And then they're not able necessarily to go to these STEM programs. So they've kind of cut off that pathway for themselves a little bit earlier on. Do you know what I mean? And so I think maybe tackling some of that and just kind of giving supports. And then I think they found that lots of students struggle with the maths portion of their degree programs. So they're trying to maybe engage with that sooner. So that's cool. Giving supports earlier. So it's super interesting.
That's really interesting. And so what's your role? Are you going to these schools and talking to people, or are you working more behind the scenes?
There's the question. Because at the moment I feel like I'm the spare part that's just lurking around asking like a lot of questions.
Sure, you're still getting the feel of things.
Yeah. There's a really cool program here where teachers can go on secondment. Mm-hmm. So we actually have a secondary school teacher who she has been sort of like, she's still has her post, but she's been kind of lent to the university for 3 years, and she's been just like a powerhouse, and she has been going out to the schools and really working with the teachers and doing those things. So I'm kind of coming in, I think my first order of business is trying to do some student engagement things.
Mm-hmm. And this is like student engagement in high school or what?
Yeah,
level?
and like even the first year of high school, like,
okay,
or maybe in America it would be more middle school, like 12 and 13-year-olds, and really trying to like, you know, maths is fun sort of thing. And yeah, so I think a big thing I did not realize is how much like event planning is part of all of this, and that is terrifying, like really terrifying.
Oh, you'd be so good at it though.
So one of the things is to maybe have this kind of maths festival.
Okay. Oh, that sounds fun. A festival of math.
Totally. But it's very, like, I think I find teaching a lot more linear, and this is very chicken and egg, because it's kind of like, okay, well, like, what type of event do you want to have? And it's like, well, it depends on what kind of location it's going to be in. And it's like, but what kind of location? It's like, well, that depends on what dates. And you're like, what dates? Well, it depends on what kind of event. And you're like, oh my God, I can't like figure out a starting point. So luckily I have 2 office mates who are incredibly generous with their time and extremely patient and are really, really skilled in this. So that's been really helpful, and they're talking me through it. But yeah, so it's super exciting, and there's just so much creativity and ideas floating around, and yes, very cool, like things pop up. Like the other day we got an email from, there is a group on campus that every semester they build a Formula 1 race car.
Oh, no way.
Every year, and they enter in a competition, and they wanted to know, could they engage with like outreach and you're like, oh yes, that sounds wonderful. And so it's seeing very generous and creative sides of people for sure.
I love that. And one of the things that's really standing out to me is if you've got this intentional goal of making math more fun, I mean, there's so many fun directions to go, like making a Formula 1 car or whatever, you know? And I just love, it's asking the right question. How can we make math fun? What would be a fun thing to do to show that math is cool? I don't know. You're going to come up with a million cool answers with that question, you know? I love that. So why did you think to apply for this job? You were job hunting. This came up. What stood out to you? Yeah,
I think, you know, in my journey that we've been documenting on the podcast, I think I love teaching and I love physics but I think I've been more and more drawn to, I really like supporting students in ways in addition to like physics education. Do you know what I mean? So I think I was kind of leaning towards that sort of stuff anyway. And then I do feel very strongly about equity in education, and particularly, well, I guess STEM, because that's what I'm doing. And so a friend of mine actually recommended the job and told me about the work that they were doing. And so that's why I applied. And then after the interview, they just seemed so really, 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 really nice and really genuine and really passionate about what they're doing. It really is like, it's very odd that it's quite a big group of people and everybody has just been extremely nice and genuine. And yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. So you got a good vibe from it. In addition to it being work that you felt called to do, you just really felt like this group of people and this, that it was something that you wanted to join.
Yeah, and like every day there's just the coolest things. So
that's awesome.
A couple of weeks ago, somebody was like, kind of put out a call for help because they were doing a graduation ceremony for a digital literacy program. And so it was in schools, it was supporting the parents to learn digital literacy, like to develop their digital literacy skills so they could support their kids in their education. And it was just the nicest ceremony ever. And all of these parents had given up their time because they really wanted to, engage with these things and be better able to communicate with their kids about stuff. And just everybody who works on everything is just super enthusiastic and very passionate about it. So it's just really very inspiring is such a trite word, but it really genuinely is. And so, yeah.
Oh, I love that. That's wonderful.
Yeah, I love it. It's really, really cool.
And so what, we're both really used to the professor job, and you've got your classes, and then maybe you've got some other meetings, and you've got your research. What's different? I mean, it sounds like everything's different, but like what's really surprising to you when you're starting this job and you're like, wow, this is what a different job, or I don't know, something that's strikingly different. What stands out to you?
Well, and it's so weird, right? Because it's not like the full, like completely different. Like it's not like I suddenly went into, corporate land, or you know what I mean? Like it's very, because it's still university stuff, but then it's just from such a different perspective.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that's so different, and I think I mentioned it on here before, is like kind of realizing that meetings are my job. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
And so much of, because the first week when people were like, well, schedule a meeting, and I was like, well, do we have to? You know what I mean? And
I got other things, yeah.
Right, and it just always felt like meetings were mostly taking you away from work you needed to get done, because like when you're teaching, you have X amount of content to prepare, and that's, you know what I mean? And so, what am I trying to say? Yes, sorry, the cold strikes again. But yeah, so I think realizing, like the meetings are the job. And
right. You're organizing this event, and that's the job you're doing, and that requires getting together and deciding where the location is and all these things.
Yeah, and I guess these guys are really, like people seem quite skilled in like leadership stuff where like meetings are really productive. And at the end,
great.
You'll be like, oh, wait, you just planned a whole event there. Like that happened. And it's not like necessarily, okay, we'll just talk around this and then later on we'll like, but like it was like, oh, okay, that was a thing and we, did the thing now. So
that makes sense. And of course, there's always different levels of productivity in different meetings, but if meetings are a key part of a job, then people will learn good skills with them and have more productive meetings, hopefully. So that's really cool.
Totally. And I think the other thing that's really surprising to me is there's a lot of like, and I don't know if that's just the kind of culture in the like the program or not, but there's a very like acceptance of there is a period of onboarding. Do you know what I mean? And it's very like, oh yeah, you're not going to know this now. It's fine. And like, don't worry, like we'll talk you through. And like, I feel like, I mean, with teaching in a tenure line position, there is a very much like, well, you're going to grow as a teacher, but you're still going to go and do that first class probably a couple of weeks after you start, and you're still totally responsible.
Sure, you're still the person who taught them this class. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think like my colleague just gave me like an onboarding document that he wrote, and it's like 7 pages long with all of these like tips and tricks and just like really helpful information. And I was thinking, and of course everyone's super generous when you start teaching and giving you materials and everything, but you're still the person, who's front and center doing the thing. So I think I'm enjoying that aspect of a little bit of like sheltering is probably maybe, I don't know if that's the right word, but there's a little bit of kind of umbrella. Like it feels like there's a little bit of security. That's
great.
So I'm enjoying that.
That's really cool. That seems like it harkens back to you saying that it seemed like a really good group that, seemed like they work well together, and that's awesome. So what about, we talked about things that are different with your new job, of course, and there's very obvious ones, but are there any things that are similar? Or we've talked before about transferable skills and how, you're applying for a new job and you're like, what could I possibly transfer from being a professor to something that's not being a professor? But now that you've started this job, and I know you're only 3 weeks in, but is there anything that you're like, oh, wow, this skill with communication is actually really useful, or I don't know, something like that?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things. And I think, because at first I really was like, I'm an absolute spare part and I really have nothing to contribute. Like, this is really... So one thing that was really, like, I think I'm being a bit, like, glib about this, but you really, because like graduations at Humboldt, like we really honed our talking to parents skills.
Oh,
and so
yes.
the other night there was a scholarship awards, and I was like, yes, I can do this for sure. I can definitely chat with parents. That's like definitely a thing I can do.
Oh, I love that.
I think the other thing is, I kind of found myself thinking about this event that I'm doing and thinking about, okay, but what's the actual like learning outcome? You know what I mean? Like, so I think I hadn't really realized that that's maybe a thing, but maybe that is a thing when you're like, okay, but what is this that I'm trying to actually get across here?
Yeah.
Do you know? Yeah. So I think
I love that. That's so cool.
something, because I guess like that's what we do, right? Like when you're teaching, you take a thing and you boil it down to what you think is the relevant thing, and so yeah.
Yeah, and and we talk about this a lot. You're going to test on something, and so you need to figure out what you're going to test on. What are you trying to get them to learn? How are you going to teach them that? So anyway, thinking about all that, that makes perfect sense that would translate into event. What are we trying to do with this event? Oh, are we trying to show that math is fun? Are we trying to, I don't know, like what's the goal? And I love that. That's really cool.
And I think that like, it's a bit like when you're teaching and you're like, this is all theoretical and like really stressful, and you're imagining your first day. And then once you actually meet the students, it all kind of makes sense. And that's really how it felt in here, because I was like, I just can't imagine what all of these things everybody's talking about is. And then once you meet the students and you're like, I do know students. I do know, do you know what I mean? And like, even though lots of things are different at this university, like the general sort of university things and things that are relevant to students, and you know what I mean, like that all is still really true and carries over. And so I think that's super helpful.
That's great. That makes a lot of sense. And then I guess my last question I was wondering is, now that you've gone through this looking for another job and you found something and it's in fact still in academia, but it's not a professor job, I just was wondering if you had any tips or suggestions for anybody who is a professor and might be looking for another job, maybe within academia, but not a professor job. What now that you've gone through the experience, do you have any recommendations or tips, or what would you tell someone who's going through something like that?
Oh, wow. Yeah. So I think, and this kind of comes back a little bit to an episode we did recently about writing a reference. I think talking to someone who is not in academia and trying to get them to tell you what your skills are, do you know what I mean? Or even how they do things. Do you know, like, so, because I found that really, really helpful, because I just felt like I was completely like, no, this is the only thing I know how to do, and there's no connections and stuff. And then I have a friend who, like, she's a manager and, has been doing that for a long time. And she was like, oh, no, like, you're doing this, and this. And when she actually described the things that she does in managing a team, you're like, that is, like, really similar to, doing this or whatever. And so I think just talking to people and saying stuff out loud to people who are outside of academia is super helpful.
That makes a lot of sense. I think that's really good tip.
And then also, like, the thing at first when I was applying for jobs, I was like, I'm just going to send my academic CV. Do you know what I mean? But like, no one cares about the papers. Do you know what I mean? Like, they don't need the full citation of your papers. Like, that's really not relevant. And, that kind of thing. So I think, again, having someone who's not in the field actually look at your stuff.
Who's not in academia, look at your stuff. Yeah, that's so funny, because the papers is such an important part of the CV. Totally. But if it's not something they want, then what? Yeah,
right. Or like, but you could say published X amount of papers without necessarily. You don't need to give the citation, or like that kind of thing.
Yeah,
and so
that makes sense.
Like, listing all of the classes you taught probably just is not relevant. So I think I was like always a bit lazy and was just like, but I don't want to change all the stuff, and I don't want to learn how to write this new thing. But it was really, really worth it in the end to do that.
Oh, that's awesome.
And yeah, so I think doing that, and I guess it's the same thing you always say to students, like, get other people to read stuff and give you feedback. Like, do not, just send it in. So I think that was good. And then, I guess the thing is, like we're not, I don't know. And like, I don't think you have this, but I had such a fear that like, no, this is the only thing I can possibly do.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean? And I just was not seeing how it would translate over. So I think
That's
being
great.
a professor is so difficult and is balancing and managing so many things. Do you know what I mean? It has so much communication stuff and all of those things. But yeah, we don't see it that way.
That makes a lot of sense. And, I remember when it was the end of my time in graduate school, we were getting close to graduating, it seemed like such a thing that we talked about was like, you have transferable skills. I know that you're in this really narrow research field, but you obviously learned how to manage data, or I don't know, there could be anything. There's so many things that you did as part of getting this very specific research project move forward. And so it's kind of analogous to that, although I don't hear people talk about it as much. So it's really nice to hear that, of course, as a professor, you have transferable skills, and we just need to think about them and list them out and get somebody not in academia to confirm that it makes sense the way you've written it, and that, I love that.
Totally. My biggest challenge too, though, is when I'm in the office, it's like it's a shared office, and I just have no self-control with chatting. Like I really and I'm like, oh man, like I need to wind this down, and then I can't help myself. So there's a lot of chatting going on all the time. So yes, but they're very patient, at least so far. So yeah.
Is there anything else you want to share with our listeners about your cool new job?
No, well, I'm really hoping that maybe we will have someone from the program on the podcast in the future to tell us, probably in a more articulate way and a more knowledgeable way, about the whole program. But
that sounds great.
Yeah, it's super interesting, and yeah, I just feel very excited about it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's wonderful. That's the most important thing. And yeah, I agree. It'd be wonderful to hear more about the equity work that's going on in Ireland. And I love the fact that with Pathways to STEM and with Access Maths, you're looking before higher ed and figuring out how to help make the pathway smoother and make more people prepared for it and interested in it. I just think that sounds wonderful.
Yes.
And I'm so glad you're excited about your new job.
Yay, thank you. And thanks, for being very supportive and letting me still be on the Professor podcast, even though I'm not actually teaching at the moment. But yes. Thanks so much for joining us on the Professor podcast with Ruth and Claire. We're delighted to have you as a listener, and we would love to hear from you. And if you want to email us, our address is contactprofessorpodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear any of your suggestions for future shows, or professor quotes that you might want to share with us, or even just things that have come up for you when you were listening to previous episodes. And if you've been enjoying the podcast, we would love if you would spread the word. So the best way to spread word is by telling people if you think they should listen to it, or you can leave us a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.